One of the many great things about growing up in the early 2000s as I did, it was this.
Boom.
The iPod. And more importantly, what it represented. The countless hours accumulating music through less than legal means, all for the once-a-month camping trip where me and a very good friend of mine would compare obscure tracks, memorize lyrics, and work to construct some kind of like ultimate and final playlist of 50,000 songs that you've never heard of. And a byproduct of the hours spent in the trenches of LimeWire, Napster, YouTube to MP3 is that you're likely to come across a couple of bands that have yet to reach the apex of their popularity. Now, at that time, the apex of popularity would be it being played endlessly on repeat on a local radio station. A modern iteration of that would be it becoming popular for like a TikTok video trend or something like that, and you end up hearing the song endlessly on every video until it makes you want to go insane. And if you were lucky or unlucky enough to be one of these early investors into a track or an artist before it became popular, you then ran the risk of being one of those "I found this before it was cool" types, which on one hand is kind of cool because look at you, clever guy or gal, recognizing quality before the general audience does, but on the other hand, the general audience is going to laugh at you because you sound like a hipster. So it's a very thin line you have to come across there, but it's part of the thrill of investing. How this ties in to film photography is actually quite straightforward. You see, before the general audience flooded to analog photography in the later stages of 2020, 2021, 2022, and into the current year, there were a few influencers out there that were making videos talking about cameras that they liked. And those videos would then become popular and then come to define the camera as it was. And nowhere is that more apparent than here. The Canonet QL17, also known as the poor man's Leica. And in this video, I want to continue to push back on the title, Poor Man Leica, because I think that's a terrible way to view this camera. I want to talk about the camera itself, why I think it's a great thing maybe you should check out. And then finally, I will tie this back in to the original point that I made, talking about music, popularity. So we'll begin with the Poor Man Leica moniker. Let's just take it at face value. Poor man's Leica. What does that really entail? A budgetary version of a Leica camera. Now, on one hand, this could be viewed as a bit of a compliment. Leica in the film photography world is synonymous with quality and with craftsmanship. And poor, to some degree, is kind of a honorary title. You know, it's a working class, blue collar kind of thing. At least that's how I interpret it. Others, of a more elitist perception might interpret it as you are unable to afford this, ergo you are lesser. I'm choosing to be optimistic. The ties between Canonet as a series of camera and Leica are very, very different. You see, Leica in its original iteration was designed for professional use. The original iteration of the Canonet was designed for an amateur level photographer. And the Canonet QL17G3 is the third final iteration of the Canonet series. It is minimized, it is smaller, it is more condensed, but it still holds on to that inherent value of being easy to use. Now, there are a lot of features to the Canonet QL17 that modernize it, that make it more professional to some degree than its earlier iterations, but I still feel like the skeleton of it is for a beginner. It has a quick load feature. Leica M6, I believe it is, has an infamously difficult loading system. You have to specially cut your film lead to make sure that it will fit. I've loaded Leicas before. I don't find it that difficult, but I don't do it often, and I was doing it in very controlled settings, so I'm not like the perfect person to ask for that, but apparently people have had issues loading Leicas in the past. The quick load system is designed for beginners. The Canonet QL17G3, this is the QL would denote, is fitted out with a quick load system. So again, it's a very obvious tie-in to its beginner nature. Now, if we want to talk about the quality of the cameras, there's obviously going to be a lot of discrepancy here because the Leicas, the M series of Leicas, those are good cameras. Like, they're just objectively very good cameras. Now, depending on what you're looking for with your frame lines, with all of these other things, and whether it has a meter or doesn't, it is going to kind of determine what Leica body you're looking for, but all of them have some basic qualities to it. It is a cloth shutter, interchangeable lens mount, whether that's the 39 screw mount or the M mount. And the other similarity is a little bit more of a vague one, and that is just that they've got really nice viewfinders, especially the later series of M cameras. You look through it, and it is like 20/20 vision. You're looking through like an Ultra HD TV display. Your frame lines are clear, your focus patch is bright. Now, where this differs, the Canonet QL17G3 obviously is a fixed lens with a leaf shutter in the middle of optic groups, meaning you cannot switch out the lens, so you're stuck with a really decent, I would say, 40mm 1.7 lens, which means it's quite fast. The viewfinder, it is a Achilles heel of this camera, as well as the shutter. The viewfinder in this tends to be a little bit foggy at times and dim. The focus patch can be kind of hard to see. It is easy enough to get in there and clean it out. Just about anybody can do that if you are so inclined, but it is still a shortcoming of the camera that I would say is something to be aware of. The other problem is, again, the shutter, and that is because of where it sits in the lens. The oil and grease and stuff that was used in the focusing barrel at times can seep into the shutter and cause the blades to fuse together, and thus causing the shutter to not open properly. Now, that is relatively easy to quickly clean out, but sometimes you need to take the whole thing apart, but even then it's not terribly difficult because the Canonet is an easy camera to work on, whereas the Leicas are not terribly difficult from my understanding, but they are very expensive cameras to work on. So you're going to have a harder time finding technicians that will do it. Canonets, I feel like, are easier to find people that can work on them, and the prices tend to be lower. That leads us into the pricing of the cameras. Just about any Leica M camera is probably going to cost you quite a pretty penny, as well as the lens is going to probably cost you more than the camera body itself at times, depending on if you're getting a Summilux, Summicron, a spherical, non-spherical. Anytime I talk about Leica glass, I just remember how little I understand it, but there are plenty of people on the internet who know much more about it, and you should listen to them and not me. The Canonet QL17G3 at its peak, I think, was going for like maximum 300. I think I've seen a couple as high as like 350 at times, but typically they sit around like 100 to 150 to 200, depending on the quality of camera you're looking for, whether it's silver, whether it's black, whether somebody popular just dropped a video on it. Any of those variables can obviously affect the pricing of it, but it's about a third to a tenth the price of a Leica M, depending again on what you're looking for. Poor Moniker does work in that regard, but I will say that I think the construction of the Canonet QL17G3 is really nice. It is all metal, it has a really good feel to it, it is very small, so it doesn't have that large vacuous feeling of its predecessors, QL17 or the QL25. It's like if you ever are driving a U-Haul truck, like one of those big moving trucks, but you haven't put any furniture in it yet, that's what it's like to shoot with one of those Canonet QL25 cameras. They're plenty fine cameras. The U-Haul truck will still drive, but it just feels like it's missing something. It feels a little bit light. The Canonet QL17G3 feels a little bit more like a mid-size crossover. Okay, it feels like could be a sporty vehicle, but it also feels capable. It feels like you can put luggage in there if you're picking up a friend from the airport and you don't have to worry about lowering the seats, but it also feels like it has a not terrible 0 to 60 time. So the robust nature of it does mean that it can take a lick and still work. That portion is just to kind of recognize that there are so many differences between the two. The only thing that the poor man Leica Moniker acknowledges is that there's a price difference and that they're rangefinders. So let's talk about just the Canonet as it is. Now I've traveled back here to Stonehenge because I wanted to make a point. Poor man Leica Moniker annoys me for two main reasons. One, of course, is the inaccuracy of it, but two, I feel like it really doesn't do the Canonet any service. Again, as I spoke about, it in some way is kind of a backhanded compliment, saying as it's a budgetary model and the relation to a camera brand that we all can kind of agree is a very professional, well-regarded system, would in some ways enhance the Canonet to the average consumer, but it also puts it lower on the totem pole for no reason other than it is not a Leica. But I feel like the Canonet QL17G3, being the third iteration of a well-renowned line of Canon rangefinder cameras, has enough gumption to stand on its own. And I kind of want to dive into this camera as it operates, some of the technical details, some of the things I really like about it, and some of the things you might really like about it. So we begin with just the fact that it was released in 1972 to 1982. Here's like the more boring technical information of the weight and the dimensions and all that good stuff. And now let's walk through some of these settings here, with speeds ranging from bulb, 1/4 of a second, all the way up to 1/500th. I've spoken about this before, but it's my understanding that mechanical leaf shutters kind of max out at 1/500th, just physically, mechanically, that's as fast as they can open. There is the Yashica Lynx, which I believe can do 1/750th or 1/1000th, I'm never quite sure. But 1/500th of a second is pretty good for most situations. Have your aperture ranging from 1.7 up to 16 with a shutter speed priority A for auto, and that is, I believe, the only one of the settings on here that actually requires electronics to work. Everything else can be fully mechanical, which is very nice. And then finally, the camera's party piece, and that is the focusing system, all of which is operated with this lovely toggle on the front here. It makes it very easy to grab quick focus, and if the focus patch was a little bit brighter, I would say that this would be an elite, cracked, as the kids would call it, way in which you can achieve sharp focus. Now, if we look at the front of the camera, it has a very, I would say, iconic profile to it. You have, of course, the focus toggle, you have the name patch here, you have a very simple Canon logo, and you have the windows, which I think look really neat. On the top, you have the stylized cursive of the Canonet QL17, very simple, very elegant. On the rear, you have some really nice, I would say, premium features, such as a film advance indicator, these red stripes, and a little window for a shutter charge indicator, so you never have to worry, oh, did I actually advance it or did I not? It's all right there. You also have a battery check light, which I don't really like too much, but the visual of the blue and red circle I think is really fun and a nice little layer to it. Moving over to the viewfinder, obviously it's not the best, it's quite dim, and if you're just looking through, the frame lines are quite simple. Readout for the aperture is also quite simple. It is fine for what it is, and it is functional, the most important thing. Now, something that is way more than functional, in fact I would argue is fantastic, is the little rubber cover for your flash sync port. This is spring loaded, which means it's the perfect little fidgety system here. It has a lovely little arrow, and if you, like I am, get kind of bored and just need something to do, this can fill hours of time, let me tell you. It takes a PX625 battery, which was a Mercury cell. Now I believe there's a 625A battery, which works fairly well. People will complain about the fact that the power output is a little bit higher than Mercury and then a little bit lower than Mercury, because as you know, the Mercury power is pretty consistent throughout time and would last about a few years. Standard alkaline, stuff like that, typically has a bit of a higher voltage and then will fall off more gradually throughout time and only lasts a couple of months. Yada, yada, yada. There's no regulating board in here. As mentioned, the electronic eye system for the CDS cell, the metering of the camera, is very straightforward. It's very simplistic. It's not really that complicated. It's very cut and dry, you could say. So there's nothing in there to save it from higher voltage, lower voltage. So the numbers that have been shot out there have been like 1.5 stops. I've shot with a lot of Canonets. I've only used the 625A alkaline batteries, and I've never really noticed a huge difference. But if you're using something like slide film, obviously that is a lot more specific on exposure, so be wary of that if you're interested. My other recommendation, if you're really concerned, is getting a zinc air battery. Those are as similar to output of mercury as possible, because obviously you can't have mercury anymore, no more lead paint, you can't have anything fun these days. But if you want a zinc air battery, they're going to be a little bit more expensive. I don't think they last as long. You're going to get more standard output, or you can just get a metering app on your phone, or get a light meter from Ravenni Labs. That would be my recommendation. Now, returning to the point I was trying to make at the beginning of the video, a song or a track that you fall in love with that has then become swept up by the general audiences and is played to death on a radio in between car dealership ads and a DJ trying to give away rock concert tickets and some kind of weird giveaway that nobody ever seems to win. What's up with that? What's the deal there? Or, becoming a TikTok trend that I cannot understand, because this world is just not made for me. The thing about these things, the trends, the general audience, is that they will sweep up that song, that track, that artist, anything like that. They will promote it. Once it begins to wane in popularity, once people start to think, okay, I've heard this about 7 million times in the last week, maybe it's time to listen to something else, they drop it and they pick up something new, some other new track or artist that someone out there somewhere really enjoyed, until then it will be played into oblivion. It is this endless cycle that never seems to end, as is the case with anything of popularity. Things come and things go. People are now listening to Nickelback, like, unironically. The thing can also be said with cameras. At the beginning of the film photography revolution or revisitation, renaissance, whatever you want to call it, the Canonet QL17 served as a bit of a blue-collar rangefinder option for people that just wanted to try it out, see what they thought, and move on. And I still feel like it serves that purpose, even if it isn't being promoted in every other video, even if it isn't being talked to at great length. It still is a high-quality camera, not in relation to a Leica, not in relation to a Voigtlander Bessa, not in relation to any of these other rangefinder systems out there. It is a good rangefinder, full stop. Not the best, not the worst, but a very good, very solid option. Beyond all that, it has remained at relatively the same price point, which makes it a great commodity. If you want to pick one up, you can probably sell it for about as much as you bought it. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but you're always going to be kind of in that nice margin of, you're never going to pay too much for one, you're never going to pay too little for one, unless of course you drop like $300 on it, then I would argue that's a little bit too much. But I'd say like that $150 to $250 range, that's kind of where your sweet spot's going to be. And I think that that is a wonderful thing that we should not lose sight of. It is going to be a fraction of the cost of any Leica that's out there, but it does have a whole lot to write home about, in my personal opinion. So the Canonet QL17G3, it is a camera that I recommend anybody try if they want to get into rangefinders. It is an affordable option. It is an easy to use option. It is even a fun option. High quality lens, premium features to it, yet still easy to use. Right in the middle, budget friendly, has a lot of features, easy to use. Everything you're kind of looking for all in one go. That being said, if you want like a 50mm lens or an 85mm lens, oops. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future content. Appreciate you all very much, and I will catch you on the next one.